Hey everyone, welcome back to Declassified. It's your girl Danielle. I hope you guys are having an amazing week so far and are ready to dive into today's episode. It's going to be a juicy one with some hard to hear but much needed advice. Today we're talking all about the cycle of toxic romantic relationships, how to break free from that cycle, how to deal with a breakup, and how to move on in a healthy way. And when you're ready to start dating again, how we can set boundaries so you don't repeat the same cycle with someone new. Now, I don't want to just sit here and lump every relationship that doesn't work out under the umbrella of just being toxic. I think that word gets thrown around a lot and overused. Some relationships are just unhealthy because they're just one-sided. They may lack communication or have misaligned values, but that doesn't necessarily make them toxic. The key difference between an unhealthy relationship and a toxic one is that an unhealthy relationship can turn healthy. On the other hand, though, a toxic relationship has kind of reached the point of no return. It's where a line in the relationship has been crossed in the form of either verbal abuse, physical abuse, or manipulation. And if you find yourself in one of these types of relationships, it's important to get out. And my hope is that this episode can be a wake-up call for someone who knows that deep down, something is wrong in their relationship. Something just doesn't feel right, but they just feel paralyzed to walk away. I get it. Dating is hard. It can be really messy. And you can wake up one day and find yourself in a very unhealthy situation. I was one of those people. I was someone who had the absolute worst track when it came to dating. Thankfully, now I'm in a very healthy relationship. I'm married and we've been together for about 3 years now. But before my husband, my love life was a hot mess. After college, I had 3 long-term relationships before I met my husband with guys who at the time, I thought genuinely loved me. But looking back on those relationships, 2 of them were simply just not healthy. They were more one-sided. And the third was just straight up toxic and abusive. And when I think back to those relationships, what's crazy is that I knew deep down they weren't healthy, but I stayed anyways because I would romanticize them so much. I just kept telling myself that this is how relationships are supposed to be and that it just isn't going to get any better. I'm not going to find anything better. And the highs and the lows signified just true love because there was passion in our relationship and we were fighting and that meant we loved each other. I mean, I would tell myself the craziest things. I would tell myself the reason these guys would treat me the way they did was because they were just so in love with me that it made them crazy. But that was crazy of me to think that when a guy is yelling at you and just calling you nasty names and saying that you can't do something or he's, just trying to control you, it's because he loves you. It's crazy that I equaled possessiveness as love. That's not love. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but it's not normal to tell someone what they can and can't do. No one should ever govern control over another individual. You should not have to ask your partner for permission to do things as if they're your parent. Obviously, there are boundaries set in relationships, and it's okay to ask someone like, hey, do you feel comfortable with me doing this? My friends want to go out to a concert or a dinner on this date. Are you okay with this? I'm just giving you a heads up. But if you have to ask permission to spend time with friends or family, or whether you can wear certain clothes, that is a big red flag. Or if they're trying to force you to do something by holding the relationship hostage, that's a big red flag. I've been there. I was the girl who would ignore every red flag. I'd make excuses for people at the detriment of my own happiness, and I'd constantly put the needs of men before my own. And let me tell you, it never worked out. One of those relationships was with a guy who didn't necessarily try to control me or what I would wear, but he would control me by trying to hold the relationship hostage. He would say things like, well, if you don't do this, then you're not the type of girl for me. Or if you aren't interested in blank, then this isn't going to work out. He was very outdoorsy, which I liked, but it was to the extreme. He loved mountain biking and riding ATVs, and he wanted us to do that together to the point where he would push me into these activities. I found myself making large purchases that I couldn't even afford. I remember being in the ATV shop with him and seriously considering buying an ATV with him just because I was afraid he would break up with me if I didn't go through with it. And I would end up buying that ATV and a mountain bike all on credit. I couldn't even afford it, all because I was so desperate to mold myself into someone that he would love. I would end up staying in that relationship for 3 years. And in that time, he never told me once that he loved me. And that makes me really sad for myself that I told him countless times that I loved him. And in those 3 years, he never once said it back. It makes me sad because I know there's a lot of women out there who feel like they're not enough and who feel like they have to become something other than themselves to receive love. So they stay in these love-starved relationships. It's, well, if I do this, then he'll love me. If we go on this vacation, then he'll know that he wants to marry me and spend the rest of his life with me. I remember the day that he broke up with me, and I just felt so defeated because I had the mindset that if I just tried hard enough, I would just try hard enough that I would receive his love. But the hard truth is, you should never have to try hard for love. You should never have to beg anyone to love you or you shouldn't even have to change who you are for somebody to love you. And it's okay if you don't share the same hobbies. I think, in fact, that's actually healthy to have individuality in relationships. And if someone doesn't know that they love you within the first year of dating, honey, it's time to drop them and move on. And looking back, I think that this relationship spoke more of what I thought about myself at the time. When I was younger, I was in middle school and going into junior high, and I was picked on by boys in my class. I wasn't the girl going through puberty that was blossoming and getting all this attention from boys. I had really bad acne, and they would call me pizza face, which is so embarrassing to say, but it's true. They called me pizza face. I played basketball, and some of the boys on my team would call me Dan the Man, joking that I looked manly. And I think going from getting bullied when I was really younger by males just left me seeking validation from men to the point where I just felt so unlovable and unseen. And it was such a stark contrast to the example that was set by my dad. So it's like I had this strong foundation of what real love should look like. My dad would willingly just give me love. So I knew it existed, but being made fun of by the opposite sex outside of my family dynamics just left me feeling like I had to prove myself in order to receive that true love that I knew was out there. And it just put me down this really weird path of constantly putting up with bad shit. Going wherever I can to get that validation from men, finding myself in relationships that would give me the taste of being loved, but it was just so short-lived that I would fall back on my face and have to get myself back up again. And I think there's this addiction to that feeling of receiving love and then being starved of love. It's this repetitive cycle that a lot of women find themselves in and they can't break free of. I was doing a lot of research on why it's so damn hard to walk away from toxic relationships. And two of the things that I found recently just hit me really hard and really resonated. So I knew I had to bring them up on the podcast. The first is attachment style. And if you lean more towards an anxious attachment style, which is common for those who are seeking validation and acceptance, it's going to be harder for you to walk away because your baseline tendency in relationships is just to try everything. It's try it again and try it again and try it again. Your instinct is just to keep pushing and keep trying to get someone to show up in a certain way, to get them to give you the comfort and validation that you're craving from them. And in a weird sort of way, the more erratic they are, the more inconsistent they are, the more your anxiety flares up. And that tends to really drive you to show up in that overfunctioning, backbending, people-pleasing behavior. Your efforts tend to ramp up in conjunction with their chaos. What I also found was that toxic people are some of the most entertaining, fun, and exciting people to be around. Sometimes they're the life of the party. Sometimes they have this bigger than life persona when on the surface they seem great. So you get caught up in celebrating the highs and the lows with this person. When they treat you right, you have fun with them and they make you laugh. They shower you with compliments, or maybe they love bomb you. Whatever it is, you get this dopamine rush and you feel that high that is just so comforting in those high moments. And that's when you get attached. It can be this exciting thrill, almost like being on a roller coaster. And we thrive off of those ups and downs and that wavering energy. And in those moments where we're being treated really well and we feel good about this person, that dopamine rush is what is going to make us fixate on them. And ultimately, it's what gets us attached and hooked on this person long term. And it's going to make it really hard to let go and more painful to let go because we focus on those good feelings. It's like a drug. So when we go through the pain later with this person, we think it's worth it because the highs are so good. They're so good. And the moments are so intense and they're filled with meaning, and it's worth the lows. And you can just really equate and compare this whole experience with a drug addiction. Here's what I found online, and I'm going to read this because I thought it was just really powerful. Toxic relationships and drugs can activate the brain's reward system. Toxic relationships lead to intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable responses, which are highly addictive. Like I said, the highs and the lows. So sometimes this person is amazing to you, which feels like the high. And then sometimes this person treats you like garbage, which is the low. Similarly, drugs activate this system directly by flooding the brain with dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and satisfaction. And this activation encourages individuals to repeat the behavior despite the negative consequences. So, when you're constantly flooding your brain with this neurotransmitter, which is associated with feelings like happiness, and then you feel the total opposite, your brain is ultimately going to crave that addictive feeling again. And you say to yourself, well, the lows are worth it because the highs are amazing. When it's good, it's really good. So you stay and you ride it out and you stick with this person regardless of how you're being treated. I can really speak to this because I stayed in a toxic and abusive relationship for a very, very long time. We would break up and get back together. He would discard me only to recycle me, love bomb me, and the cycle would repeat again. And I would go back to him every single time. I think it was like 4 or 5 times. And honestly, I lost count. But it was the typical pattern of narcissistic abuse. In the beginning, it was good. The relationship was new and it all felt perfect and wonderful until it didn't. Slowly, he started to break me down. He even used the term that he was grooming me, which should have been my first red flag. But in my eyes, I was a 29-year-old that was behind in life. I was up to my eyeballs in debt, and 5 months into the relationship, I lost my job. So I moved in with him because financially I couldn't afford my apartment. I just had little to no self-esteem. And looking back, that's where I really got sucked in. And it just all started with making me feel guilty for wanting to work out. He began not trusting me when I would go work out or go to the gym or hang out with other people in my life. He isolated me from my friends and my family. My world became very, very small, and any connections that I had outside of the relationship just started to fade. He made me feel bad about posting selfies because in his mind, I was posting them for validation from other guys and I was marketing myself like I was single and on the market. He criticized me for my clothing, so I would end up just changing what I wore. I found screenshots on his phone of other women, and when I called him out on that, he admitted to saving pictures of other women in case we broke up, and acted like I was the one that was overreacting and that it was my fault for not trusting him. He would withhold sex from me and say it was because he was turned off by how muscular my upper body was, which looking back just makes me want to cry because, like, for my inner child, because that was such a damaging comment to make considering what I had been bullied for in middle school. He would call me childish, immature, a piece of shit, and names that I would never repeat on this podcast. They were so bad. Towards the end of the relationship, the emotional abuse turned to physical abuse. His family dynamic even exacerbated everything. His own sister at one point tried to get him to cheat on me with one of her friends. It was just a huge mess. And the more he broke me down, the more I began to lose myself in the relationship trying to appease him. The cycle lasted just over 3 years. Anytime we had a good moment, I would hang on to it and I would just brace for impact because I knew a blow up would eventually follow. We would be on for 6 months, break up, on for another 6 months, break up, and he would lure me back each time with promises of an engagement because he knew that's what I desperately wanted. But every time, like clockwork, he would show his true colors within a week or so of us getting back together, and the promise of an engagement would quickly be broken. I vividly remember the very last time I went back to him. I was so hesitant at this time, and it took me 3 months before I finally said yes. 3 months of him trying to win me back before I finally gave in. Typically, I would run back to him right away, but something was very different this time. And I think women can have this flip of a switch moment in relationships where they're just done. Have you ever heard of the saying, women leave mentally before they leave physically? Once you lose her mind, like the body soon follows, but it follows like very much after. Well, that was very true in my case. And during those 3 months of being detached from him and the roller coaster of the relationship, it just started to help me see very clearly. And during that time, I got really real with myself on what I had gone through, what I was allowing to happen to me. And through therapy, I explored boundaries and what those truly meant for me, what boundaries even were, and I wrote them down. So when I went back to him the last time, I kind of felt like I had this new armor around me in case it fell apart. And it did. It would fall apart again. But he lured me back in with the promise of an engagement again and how he couldn't live without me and he wanted to marry me. And he actually had planned a vacation where he said he was going to propose to me on. And I was so excited. Like I told all my friends and family. And at that point, I had convinced my friends and family that trying again was a good idea, only to have it all blow up in my face again because he would eventually cancel that trip one day before us leaving on it. And his excuse was that he was sick, he didn't feel good, and I inevitably turned into the bad guy. He said things like, "You're not taking good enough care of me when I'm sick." He said he didn't want to marry me because I didn't have a single nurturing bone in my body. And I just remember feeling so numb in this moment, so numb, dumb, and embarrassed. I had told all my close friends and my parents, when you go through these cycles of breaking up and getting back together and off and on, like whoever you lean on, you also drag them through it with you. And finally, I just got to this point where I realized I wasn't the problem. I could never live up to his unrealistic expectations. And in fact, he wasn't even living up to mine. He was actually crossing every boundary that I had written down. And I wasn't even asking for a lot. I was asking for the bare minimum, to be treated with respect. And so I ended it. And through lots of therapy, I've come to realize that we were driven by two different things. He was driven by money and success, and I was driven by love and connection and family. And that he lived in his own little world, and I was just a pawn in his game. But it took me 3 years to figure that out. Like, damn, talk about wasted time. And even though at the end I had zero doubt in my mind, like zero doubt to this day, I'm like, dodged a bullet, zero doubt there that we weren't meant to be together. It was still really hard for me to pick up the pieces of my life and start over again. Because when you finally end it and go through with a breakup, it can lead to intense withdrawal symptoms such as depression, anxiety, and fear. And typically, when these sorts of relationships end, we tend to feel relief for just like a short bit. But often than not, we're left feeling just overwhelmed by confusion, grief, shame. And we can have a lot of shame surrounding what we put up with and for how long we put up with it for. And a lot of times these relationships don't end nicely. It's not tied up in this nice little bow and a nice way for us to make sense of what had happened. I heard someone once refer to this feeling as being in a war zone. You just wake up one day and it's like a bomb went off and you're just left with all the chaos and the rubble around you. And people tend to search for closure in these situations. Like it's something they need at the end of a relationship. But here's the truth about closure. It's very rare, especially for dysfunctional dynamics. It's closure is rare, especially for one-sided relationships, because if we really unpack closure, closure is a sense of acceptance and understanding what happened and why it happened the way it did. And the very nature of toxic relationships is that there is not a lot of sense to them, right? They're very chaotic, inconsistent, and probably they weren't really great at communicating. You probably never felt fully validated or seen by this person. And so when it ends, you feel very defeated because you were never able to fully get there and make it work with this person. I think closure is a tricky piece to this because oftentimes we tell ourselves that we need to get closure from this person in order to be able to move on. So we hold ourselves back. And like I said, the irony in these relationships that leave you reaching for closure, needing to have one more conversation, are probably the relationships where you're never going to get it, because the person who leaves you in this sense of confusion and disarray is probably not the person who has the capacity to give you the closure that you're seeking. We tell ourselves just one more conversation, it's all I need, and then I can move on. But remember, this person that you're wanting to have just one more conversation with is the same person who hurt you or who was unable to emotionally support you. It's the same person, and they haven't magically developed some emotional maturity to show up for you now in this moment. So if you're one of those people, please trust me when I say that your closure comes from within. Your closure comes from finding a level of acceptance within yourself. And sometimes that acceptance is accepting that you will never fully understand what happened. You'll never fully know the truth, why they behaved the way they did, or said the things that they said. And coming to terms with that is the first step of letting go and trusting that that's where your closure comes from. It's really an inner peace rather than finding some sort of outer relational story that finally feels cohesive to you, because not everything in life makes sense. There isn't always a nice explanation that makes us feel better. So we actually just need to self-source that level of acceptance and peace. The other thing I'd like to say is your brain is very, very powerful. And when your brain gets hooked in a toxic cycle with someone, it can be really, really hard to let go and remove yourself from these toxic cycles. So what are some signs or warnings that you're with a toxic person? These are a lot of the same things that I've experienced personally. Number one is you always feel like you're doing something wrong in their eyes. They're always mad at you or upset. Number two is that you feel like you have to undercut your value and always drop your boundaries or lower your standards around them. Number three is you always feel like you're asking for too much of this person. Number four is you feel insecure or anxious around them. I remember anytime my ex would call me and I would see his name pop up on my phone, my heart would immediately start racing because I never knew what emotion that I would be met with on the other line. Number five is you feel like you're walking on eggshells so they don't run away from you. Number six, you have glimpses of good times, but you feel like they're few and far between because you're already anticipating the low moments. And lastly, number seven, this person's energy constantly wavers and flip-flops, and you can never fully anticipate their next move, also known as inconsistency. If any of those resonate with you, I really want you to think about why you're tolerating a situation like this or a person like this in your life. I really don't want you to make the same mistakes that I did. And hopefully from my experiences, I can save you guys from some heartache. So I want you guys to ask yourselves, are you staying with this person because you're afraid that this is the only person that's going to give you any sort of attention? If you let go now, that you'd be missing out on the potential of an amazing future? Or are you just staying together because you live together and it makes sense financially. Get really honest with yourself and ask yourself why you're continuing to allow this toxic person in your life. Something that helped me get to the root of some of my issues was journaling, specifically voice notes. I would record voice notes in my phone. There were moments where I literally felt so crazy dealing with the highs and the lows that the only thing that grounded me was recording voice notes of how I was feeling and documenting what was happening in the relationship. And at this time, I felt like I had no one else to talk to, so I just talked to myself. So if you're struggling with this, I want you to start journaling or do voice notes, because sometimes your brain will actually think of things subconsciously that you're not aware of on the conscious level. And when you journal, that can come out on paper. So ask yourself these questions. Why are you allowing this behavior? What are you afraid of? And often when we journal and reflect, it actually gives us the space to reflect and to come up with really valid answers. And then you'll start to unpack and understand why you're making these decisions. For me, when I was tolerating really bad behavior, it was the fear of never finding anyone else that would treat me right. And that kept me stuck on all the wrong people, just people that treated me wrong. It was the fear that I'd never find a connection that was two-sided. It was the fear of missing out on the potential of what that person could be, because I always see the best in people. And it was the fear of throwing away the relationship based on the time and energy that I had already invested. But the truth is, toxic people will show you their colors right away, even if you choose to ignore it in the beginning. So instead of being afraid of throwing away a bad thing, we need to reframe our thinking instead to how we can find the right thing and how to see red flags from the beginning so we don't fall into another unhealthy relationship. And I think that all comes back to knowing our boundaries, right? And loving ourselves. It's knowing how you want to be treated and not settling for anything less. Those truths will help you stand strong when you enter into any type of relationship, so you can honor your boundaries regardless if someone agrees with them or not. And let me tell you, once you get to that point where you start putting yourself first, it's going to give you so much strength. Removing people from your life that aren't meeting your requirements is going to make you feel stronger. So if someone new comes along and crosses a boundary and then you're just over there justifying it and playing the empathetic card, it's, well, he didn't really mean it like that. That means you're not really sticking to your boundaries, are you? It's, well, he didn't text me for 3 days and he left me on red, but it's okay because he's been really busy. No, no. If someone truly cares about you, it takes zero effort to send a 2-second text to let someone know that they're okay and they'll hear from you later on at a different time. Or maybe a guy is only making plans with you on a Tuesday during the week, but never wants to give up his weekends. Honey, you are not his priority, which is fine. But if you're looking for something more serious, it's on you to speak up for yourself. And that's why it's so important to know yourself so you don't budge on things that make you feel uncomfortable. There's always room in relationships for empathy, but not when it comes to your boundaries. And while it's okay to be hopeful in a relationship and think, positively and to be optimistic about situations, that's a great quality, but it's never worth it if you're continuously sacrificing yourself. If any of these dynamics ring true for you, it's time to walk away. I mean, why would you put yourself through toxic crap for maybe another couple months, another year, maybe 2? Don't be like me when it takes you 3 freaking years to figure it out, because 90% of the time, we're going to have to be the ones to cut it off and walk away. That person that you're so tangled up with is not going to do it because they love that you're there. They love the attention they get from you. Their ego craves you and gets validated by you, and they're not going to cut off that supply. But you deserve to be happy. You deserve to feel comforted and safe and with the right person. You don't deserve someone who's going to gaslight you into thinking you're constantly asking for too much. So how do we set healthy boundaries and really get over a toxic person? Well, a lot of it comes from just rewiring your mindset. It takes time. It doesn't just happen overnight. But once you learn how to slowly reprogram your brain, you'll understand that you were never too much. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. So If you're listening to this right now and you're like, wow, Danielle, I have zero boundaries. I don't even know what boundaries are. How do I find them? Take out a piece of paper or use your notes app in your phone and start reflecting. Boundaries simply help us live in alignment with our priorities and values by laying out emotional and physical limits that protect our overall well-being. It's basically what you're okay with and what you're not okay with. So reflect on what makes you feel uncomfortable, resentful, disrespected, embarrassed, or dismissed. Ask yourself, what qualities are actually important to you? How do you envision your future partner loving you, treating you? What is your expectation of consistency? Get honest with yourself and write down those values, and naturally, your boundaries will flow out from them. An example of this would be maybe if you're looking for a serious relationship, a boundary would include not having sleepovers with someone or being intimate before a commitment. Other examples of boundaries could include not texting during work hours or not kissing on the first date. For me, words of affirmation is part of my love language, and so lack of communication is a big deal breaker. And being with someone who can adequately express their emotions and tell me how they feel about me is very important. You just have to be clear about what you want and what you're looking for and what you can't live without. Boundaries aren't about controlling people or keeping people out of your life. Boundaries are simply the standards you set to protect yourself and your overall well-being. It doesn't mean shutting people out or creating walls. It's more about finding that delicate balance between like self-preservation, self-care, and connection with people. The second part of healthy boundaries is actually communicating them to whoever you're dating or in a relationship with. It's being super freaking clear, like crystal clear with people, telling them up front what you're looking for and not wavering on that. I want to preface this first with, if you just came out of a relationship, please take the time for yourself. We shouldn't be bouncing from one relationship to another because you're afraid of being alone. In fact, there's growth that comes from enjoying your alone time and learning to love yourself, especially if you've come out of a relationship where you've been starved of love or you've been treated poorly. Now is the time to pour back into yourself. You need to be able to pour love back into yourself and heal before you jump into another relationship. When I started dating again after moving on from my toxic relationship, I got really good at communicating what I wanted and deciding if someone wasn't good for me or not. I used to call myself the one date wonder because I would go on dates and it was like an episode of MTV's dating game show Next. I'd be like, next, don't like you, next, not a Christian, see you later. Take too long to text back, I'm bored. Trying to sleep with me on the first night, no thank you. I feel like if you're not honest from the get-go, that's just going to cause friction and problems long-term, because in relationships, both parties come into it with expectations and just preconceived ideas of what the relationship will be. To this day, I'm 100% certain that my marriage is as healthy as it is because when we first started dating, we crushed all our expectations and just assumptions about each other with clear communication from the beginning. We told each other before we ever became exclusive what our wants were, what our needs were. We talked about our love languages and our boundaries. For me, arguing to the point of yelling and name calling, which is what I had experienced in my previous relationship, is just one of my strictest boundaries. And I can sit here and tell you that that boundary has never been crossed. You and your partner are never going to be on the same page unless you start writing the book together. Now, that's not to say that if you're having a first date with someone, you automatically just need to lay it out all on the table and run through your list of boundaries. That's kind of weird, right? And it might turn somebody off and doesn't even sound like a fun first date. So I think you can be upfront about certain things when you're early on in dating, like what you're looking for. Sometimes these things come up naturally in conversation, whether you want to build a family or you just want something more casual. But you can also let things play out naturally and set boundaries as needed. For example, let's say you go out with somebody and your boundary is that you don't kiss on the first date. So you tell your date and it turns out they actually had no intention of kissing you to begin with. Letting it play out would be like seeing what happens at the end of that date and only expressing that boundary if it looks like they're trying to go in for a kiss. Obviously, the second one is much riskier, but it shows that you have confidence. And if they're still trying to push the issue, that's your cue to just walk away. Their reaction to any of your boundaries will tell you everything. The reaction we want to setting a boundary, a reaction from somebody else, is openness. We want them to meet you with level-headedness, openness, understanding. And if anyone meets you with anger, dismissiveness, or jokes or makes fun of you for something that you're asking for, run in the other direction, or you're going to find yourself in another unhealthy relationship. And generally, guys, just date slower. Sticking to boundaries is easier when you're not in a rush. For me, that helped a lot. Just dating slowly. My husband and I were friends for close to 3 months before we ever went on our first date. It was a lot of texting and getting to know each other on a personal level first. And trust me when I tell you, if a guy is really interested in you and is worth your time and energy, he will stick around until you're ready. And also, I just want to quickly shout out my husband for making me feel so safe with boundaries, because from day one, he's been really respectful and understanding and has also been able to communicate with me his own boundaries too. And it's not lost on me that for the first time in my life, I'm sitting here and I'm in the most healthy relationship I've ever been in. So I just want to give him a quick shout out, because I've finally found someone who loves me for who I am. And you guys deserve that too. You deserve someone who is going to love you for who you are and respect what makes you feel uncomfortable and not do those things. You deserve someone to want to learn your love language to make you feel safe and seen. You deserve to be a priority and not an option. It should never take you having to walk away or threaten to walk away and have to go through indescribable amounts of pain in order for someone to miss you and to know what they've lost. It should never take substantial amounts of energy and effort to prove your worth to anyone. You deserve someone who sees your worth right away, and you don't have to play any games. You don't have to pretend you're something you're not. You don't have to sugarcoat anything or hide pieces of yourself in order for them to commit to you or want to be with you. They should just accept you for who you are. And if anyone shows you that they don't value you or respect you, if someone continuously does things that make you feel unworthy or small or like you're not good enough for them, then it's time to walk away, especially if you've addressed how you feel with this person and they continue to do the same things over and over again. That's when you need to gain some self-respect. You have to trust that by walking away from this person, it's a decision you're making not only for you, but also for your future self. You deserve the same type of love that you offer, and there is somebody out there who will give it to you in return. When it comes to toxic relationships, a lot of the times it's not about what we want, it's about what needs to be done. So you can choose to wallow in your own misery for years, choose to jump back into the frying pan and continue to get burned, or you can finally make the empowering decision to put yourself first. It can be tough, but it just takes that first step of letting go and moving on. And the best thing you can do is just let go of the bad. Learn to love yourself again. Enjoy your own company and accept that you deserve more, and then go out there and find that more. I really hope this episode has helped someone who feels stuck and alone. Please know that you're not alone, and don't be afraid to reach out to a friend or a family member if you need help. Don't isolate yourself, and remember that you deserve more than the bare minimum. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it on Instagram and tag me in your stories. Send this episode to a friend who needs to hear it. Thanks as always for listening. Be sure to rate the show on Spotify. Seriously, I think we're at like 34 reviews right now. So let's bump that up to 35. Let's hit 40 reviews. Go rate the show on Spotify. Ratings really help new shows like mine just find a bigger audience. Thanks as always for being here and for listening. I'll see you guys next week for another episode of Declassified. Until then, be blessed and make good decisions. Bye, guys.